Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Mindy Mandell, and this is another video in the series of videos on Proclus's Elements of Theology. Today I'm going to talk about propositions 151 through 153. For those who would like to see the full playlist, I will put it here for you. And as always, I am using the E.R. Dodds translation. So for those of you who do not have the paper version, there is a link in the description box for a PDF. Okay, so jumping into the text, I'm going to start with proposition 151. All that is paternal in the gods is of primal operation, and it stands in the position of the good at the head of the several divine ranks. Now this is an interesting one. So the highest term in each series, Proclus is calling paternal, and he is describing these highest terms as being analogous to the good. And here's how the explanation starts. For by itself, it produces the substantive existence of the secondary principles, the totality of their powers and their being, in virtue of a single unspeakable transcendence, whence indeed it is named paternal, as manifesting the unified and boniform potency of the one and the constitutive cause of all secondaries. So a very important sentence. Proclus has just defined what he means by the word paternal. It produces the substantive existence of the secondary principles. So what does that mean? It means that it gives them their being, and it does so with what Proclus calls a single, unspeakable transcendence. And also, quite curiously, it also gives them the totality of their powers. And this is probably a good time to remind you that all the way back in Proposition 7, Proclus told us that productive causes not only give existence, but also the power proper for that existence. And if I scroll down just a little, you see here, again, it is impossible that the producer should ever be inferior. For as it gives the product existence, it must furnish also the power proper for that existence. And this is exactly what Proclus states is happening in Proposition 151. The paternal gods not only produce secondary principles, but they also furnish the power that is needed for those secondary principles to function. And now Proclus goes on. In each order of gods, the paternal kind is sovereign, producing from itself the whole and regulating it, as being analogous in station to the good. This phrase, producing from itself the whole and regulating it, is reminiscent of Proposition 23. So Proposition 23 is the one that reads, all that is unparticipated produces out of itself the participated, and all participated substances are linked by upward tension to existences not participated. And we saw in our discussions of this, and I've talked about this in a number of different videos, so just a bit of review here. But we see that the unparticipated monad will give something of itself, whereof the receiver becomes a participant, while the given attains substantial existence as a participated term. So the paternal term analogous to the good is what is here in Proposition 23 called the unparticipated. And unparticipated, as Proclus has shown in other propositions as well, means transcendent and separate. And we've already seen in Proposition 151 that the paternal gods enjoy a single, unspeakable transcendence. Remember that phrase? The whole that is produced in Proposition 151, then, by the paternal term, is the participated whole that we are seeing here. Now see if that language that we saw in Proposition 23 matches what we're looking at here. In each order of gods, the paternal kind is sovereign, and sovereign here is the word he's using to mean transcendent. It is sovereign, separate, producing from itself the whole and regulating it. So producing from itself, giving something of itself is the language in 23, as being analogous in station to the good. And now Proclus goes on. Fathers differ in degree of universality, as do the divine orders themselves, in proportion to their causal efficacy. And there are thus as many diverse fathers as there are entire processive orders of gods. So in other words, Proclus is telling us that there is a transcendent paternal God at the head of each order of gods. For if in every order there is something analogous to the good, the paternal must exist in all of them, and each must proceed from a paternal unity. And so the structure of this metaphysical hierarchy is coming a bit more into focus. Okay, Proposition 152. All that is generative in the gods proceeds in virtue of the infinitude of divine potency, multiplying itself and penetrating all things, and manifesting especially the character of unfailing perpetuity in the processive orders of secondary principles. So here Proclus is focusing on the providential function of generation. And we see that it proceeds in virtue of the infinitude of divine potency. And we're going to see that he connects then this particular function with the proceeding aspect of a triad versus the top of the triad, which we saw in the paternal. And we're going to see better in the explanation the connection being made between generation and potency. Okay, this first sentence is very long, as you can see, so I'm going to read the whole thing through and then I'm going to break it up into parts. So it reads, "For to increase the number of processive terms by drawing them from their secret embracement in their causes and advancing them to generation is surely the peculiar office of the God's infinite potency, through which all divine principles are filled with fertile excellencies, each in its fullness giving rise to some further principle in virtue of that superabundant potency." So we see here that Proclus is drawing from Propositions 25 and 27. They both deal with generation. Before I jump to those, though, I want to focus on the first part of this sentence. Okay, Proclus starts off by saying that the number of processive terms is increased by drawing them from their secret embracement in their causes and advancing them to generation. So this phrase, I think, inspires some interesting imagery. The processive terms, it says here, are secretly embraced in their causes. What does that mean? Well, our education system, at least in the U.S. where I'm from, and I think in Europe as well, is largely Aristotelian in influence. So you would be forgiven then if you imagine that these processive terms unfold from potentiality into actualization, as if manifestation in our physical world is what actualization is. That is Aristotle, though, not Plato, not Proclus. This issue has come up previously in this video series, but I think it's worth revisiting. For Proclus, the intelligible eidos are absolute realities, and our realm of materiality is what he is referring to as the realm of potentiality. Proclus first introduced this idea in Proposition 77. Okay, 77 reads, all that exists potentially is advanced to actuality by the agency of something which is actually what the other is potentially. Now, the partially potential by that which is actual in the same partial respect, and the wholly potential by the wholly actual. This is a difficult one to see because the idea of advancing to actuality fits that modern image of eidos being just ideas or concepts, and the actual being what you manifest with that concept. For Proclus, though, it is the return to the cause that is the perfecting of the potential. It says later in the explanation here that everything potential is imperfect as potential, while everything actual is perfect as actual. So reality unfolds from the perfect and the truly real to the imperfect and potential. Our physical world, including our bodies, has a mode of reality, but it is not truly real. This revertive turning about of intellect knowing itself is called in Greek ousia. And when we, in the course of our meditations or our contemplations, when we turn the eye of our soul, I'm talking about that divine awareness that is our essence. And when we turn this awareness to its source, so as to remember what we truly are beyond this physical body that we erroneously identify with, this is often referred to as self-actualization. And this term makes sense because the potential is perfecting itself by returning to the actual. And so I think it's important to keep this in mind when looking at this first sentence in Proposition 152. This drawing from their secret embracement in their causes into generation is not a movement from the potential to the actual. It is the opposite. Procession is movement from the truly real to the irradiations or the images of real things. So this is why these processive terms are pre-embraced in their causes, or secretly embraced as it's worded here. It is in their causes that they truly are. Here's one place where this idea of pre-existing or being pre-embraced in the cause came up. Proposition 65. All that subsists in any fashion has its being either in its cause as an originative potency, or as a substantial predicate, or by participation after the manner of an image. And so you see here the idea of being pre-existent in the producer, which is its cause. We also saw this idea a couple of propositions later in 67. In introducing the terminology of whole before the parts, Proclus used this name of whole before the parts to describe the form pre-existing in the cause. So now I'm back at Proposition 152, and we're still on the first sentence. Now the next part of the sentence reads that what's going on here is surely the peculiar office of the God's infinite potency, through which all divine principles are filled with fertile excellencies. So we've seen more deeply into the process of procession, and now Proclus tells us that this unfolding is the office of the infinite potency of the gods. So Proclus is tying procession to potency and generation. And this is perhaps not surprising, but to see this more clearly, it would help to bring in the rest of the sentence. So through the God's infinite potency, divine principles are filled with fertile excellencies, And what results from this is that each in its fullness gives rise to some further principle. And this is often called the law of generation. And this is proposition 25. Whatever is complete proceeds to generate those things which it is capable of producing, imitating in its turn the one originative principle of the universe. And he shows that these principles imitate the good, and in like manner, these principles that are consequent upon the good are impelled because of their proper completeness, keywords there, to generate further principles inferior to their own being. So whatever is complete is compelled to generate. It is a mark of completeness to generate. And each realm unfolds at its proper degree of potency, with the declension or the decrease in potency that is proper to each realm, until eventually reaching that realm which is unable to generate any further. And so if you wonder why does divine mind unfold from the intelligible to the physical realm, this is why. It is not the moral answer that we tend to be looking for from the human perspective, but there it is. And Dodds had also cited Proposition 27. Proclus made this connection between generation and potency even more clearly here in Proposition 27, which reads that every producing cause is productive of secondary existences because of its completeness, as we saw in 25, and he's also adding the superfluity of potency. And now I will finally go on to the second sentence. It reads, "Thus the especial office of generative divinity is the governance of potency, a governance which multiplies and renders fertile the potencies of the generated, and spurs them to beget or constitute still other existences." So whenever you come across discussions of potency in metaphysics, it has some connection to generation. And this last sentence is also quite long. "For if each principle communicates to the remaining terms its own distinctive character which it possesses primitively, then assuredly the fertile always implants in its consequence the succession of fertility, and so it mirrors that infinitude which is the primordial parent of the universe, whence proceeded all the generative potency, whose transcendent prerogative it is to diffuse the divine gifts in their unfailing succession." Okay, another juicy sentence here. I'll break this one down. Okay, the sentence starts off with Proclus telling us that each principle communicates to the remaining terms its own distinctive character which it possesses primitively. So there's a monad at the head of the series, and then the series that unfolds through likeness. This idea has come up quite often throughout this video series, so I think that those of you following all the videos probably see this quite easily by now. But for those jumping through the series, no problem. I'll quickly review 97. In 97 reads that the originative cause of each series communicates its distinctive property to the entire series. And what the cause is primitively, the series is by remission. And remission was defined in this proposition as the declension appropriate to secondary existences. And then Proclus goes on to state that if we accept this relationship of principle to its series, then assuredly the fertile always implants in its consequence the succession of fertility, and so mirrors that infinitude which is the primordial parent of the universe, whence proceeded all the generative potency. So now Proclus is going a step further. Before he tied potency to generation, but now he has reached farther up in the metaphysical hierarchy to name infinity itself as the cause of all the potency that is the cause of generation. So he called it the primordial parent of the universe. And that is a reference to the infinite power in the dyad of limit and infinity. And Proposition 92 sets up infinity as the first potency. It reads, "The whole multitude of infinite potencies is dependent upon one principle, the first infinity, which is not potency in the sense that it is participated or exists in things which are potent, but it is potency in itself, not the potency of an individual, but the cause of all that is." And just a little bit before this proposition, we saw Proposition 89, which said that all true being is composed of limit and infinite. And then Proposition 90, saying prior to all that is, prior to even being itself, all that is composed of limit and infinitude. There exists substantially and independently the first limit and the first infinity. And so prior to being itself is the dyad, limit and infinity. And if I scroll back down, we see that back in Proposition 92, it ends by saying that infinity falls between the first principle and being. So in other words, it is a condition for being to be. And so it is prior to being. Now, when we're talking about the realms of being, we often use this triadic relationship of remain, proceed, and revert. The gods, of course, are henads. They are onenesses, so they do not have this threefold aspect to them. However, what we're seeing here is that there are some gods that are analogous to the hyparxis, the remaining. There are some that are analogous to the proceeding aspect. And we're going to see there are some that are analogous to the reverting aspect as well. That which is generative in the gods is generally considered analogous to the middle of the triad, just as the paternal we saw was analogous to the hyparxis, or the top of the triad. And as for the generative, this is because they're tied to the idea of procession. Additional way to label these three, other than remain, proceed, and revert, is the triad of father, power, and activity. So we would have a triad something like this. And you can see power is tied to the idea of proceeding and potency, generation. And in Greek mythology, by the way, this middle term of the triads is generally held by a goddess instead of a male god, and this generative function is the reason why. There's a whole lot going on here in Proposition 152. If you still have any questions about it, please let me know. Okay, and now we'll look at Proposition 153. All that is perfect in the gods is the cause of divine perfection. So Proclus gave us the paternal, or the father, in Proposition 151, and the generative in Proposition 152. Now he rounds out the triad with the perfective. So we're going to see here that the perfective is analogous to the extremity of the triad. I already touched on this a bit in my explanation of potential versus actual. But that act of reversion to the cause, to the actual from the potential, is an act of perfecting. However, what we're going to see here in Proposition 153 is that the perfection of the gods differs from that of the existence. And this is because these three aspects that we've been talking about are the mark of all that is. However, the gods, remember, are henads, onenesses. They are beyond the threefold unity of intelligible being. And so Proclus opens up the explanation by explaining that as existence, or things that are, and the principles superior to them, the super-existential, they differ in their mode of substance. and so also do the perfections proper to the gods themselves differ in nature from the secondary perfections of existence. The former, referring to the perfections proper to the gods, are self-complete and of primal operation, because the gods are the primal possessors of the good, whereas the latter, the secondary perfections of existence, are perfect by participation. The excellence of the gods were first introduced in Proposition 119. The substance of every god is a supra-existential excellence. He has goodness neither as a state nor as part of his essence, for both states and essences have a secondary and remote rank relatively to the gods, but is supra-existentially good. And now the last part of the sentence, here we're talking about things that exist, that have being. And he says here that they are perfect by participation. Being perfect by participation refers to that reversion that I called ousia before. It perfects intellect in that very act of reversion. For this reason, the perfection of the gods is distinct from that of things divinized. Things divinized, of course, refers to existence that are made divine by participation in the gods. But the primal perfection which resides in the gods is the cause of being perfect, not only to things divinized, but also to the gods themselves. For if every principle, in so far as it is perfect, is reverted upon its proper origin, then the cause of all the divine reversion has the office of making perfect the order of gods. So this reference to Proposition 31 is to the proposition that describes that reversion that I've been talking about. And Proposition 31 states that all that proceeds from any principle reverts in respect of its being upon that from which it proceeds. And in the course of the explanation, you see that through that which gives it being, it attains its well-being. So by returning to its cause, it is perfected. I want to focus now on the last part of this sentence, the cause of all divine reversion. So the perfect in the gods is the providential cause of all reversion. And so what Proclus has given us with these three propositions that I talked about in this video, he gave us the highest ranks of the gods. Well, I do hope that you found that helpful, and as always, if you do have any questions or comments, you can put those below. And also, I would always appreciate a sub and a like if you found this helpful. Thank you very much.